book people, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about writing emotional responses and how to avoid vagaries and cliches. So I'm going to be talking specifically about alternatives to the tingle up the arm and the gasp. So tingle up the arm. I have trouble when I read this in books because I cannot remember any time in my romantic journey that I ever had this happen. Like a literal tingle going up the arm. That's never happened to me. I have to imagine that some people somewhere have felt this, but I don't think it's common enough to be the thing that constantly shows attraction in a book. I think it's popular because it's a very good visual description. You can imagine in your mind's eye the pathway that, someone touches and then the tingle runs up the arm into the heart and love. However, just because it's a good visual description doesn't mean it's a good emotional description. Because if someone hasn't actually felt that and can really identify with it and say, oh my gosh, I know what that feels like, then you're going to kind of lose readers. So what is it that we're trying to describe there? The tingle up the arm when encountering the love interest is supposed to show attraction and instant chemistry. So then how else could we describe that? A lot of times, chemistry is just the being drawn to someone. Is your character being pulled toward that person? Is it this involuntary feeling of I'm leaning toward them and I don't know why and I probably shouldn't be doing that, so I'm going to pull back? Do you want to describe it as it felt like there was a string attached to my shoulder that was being pulled in their direction and I just couldn't help it? There's a lot of ways that you could go about describing that pull, that connection. And even if you did want to describe a specific hands brushing and there's something there, I think there are better ways, and certainly more varied ways than just the tingle up the arm. In the 2006 Pride and Prejudice, Darcy hands Elizabeth up into the carriage. She looks at him because something weird's going on. And then the camera follows his hand hanging at his side as he flexes it out. And we all know what that means. He's trying to figure out what that feeling is there in his hand because, yes, there was some connection. But that flex tells us that maybe there was a warmth or a zing or something where, he feels like he needs to almost get rid of that lingering warmth on his hand or whatever is there. How else can we describe that instant attraction, the chemistry? When I was just starting to get to know my husband, we were in the school cafeteria and he leaned over in front of me to get a scoop of ice cream out of this ice cream thing. And I caught the scent of like his cologne or his detergent. I don't know what it is, but I was like, oh my gosh. Like, I never thought that I was oh my gosh, he smells so good person. But the scent of whatever he was wearing hit me. And I was like, I had to take a moment because it was there. And it's hard to describe, but it was there. So there are so many different ways that we can pick up on describing attraction and being drawn to someone. So just kind of, find the varied ways. Okay, the gasp. The gasp. There is a spectrum of what it means to gasp. And so when we just describe a character as they gasped, it's hard to know exactly what that means unless we've padded the area around it with enough indicators to know what's going on. But we can also utilize the actual description of the gasp to convey the emotion. For me, when I read that someone gasped, I tend to think, I think of the dramatic one. I think of the over the top, like, oh my gosh, you've taken my breath away sort of gasp. And that's hardly ever what the author actually intended to convey. If someone jumps out from behind a corner and genuinely scares you, yes, it's going to be that dramatic, oh, and step back and lean over and cover your heart and oh my gosh, take a breath. That's a scared, startled kind of gasp. But that kind of a gasp is very different than you sitting beside your date and you see someone walk in the room who you haven't seen for 5 years, but who you care about and who takes your breath away. That's not going to be a dramatic gasp. That you're sitting by someone who's your date, who you're supposed to be paying attention to. You're supposed to have decorum and keep things under control. So you're going to gasp very small. It might be audible, it might be not. It might be through your mouth, the hissing air into your lungs as they convulse. It might be through your nose, that startled in and then freeze. There could be something that startles you so much that it's like a stuttering gasp, or maybe you gasp in just a little bit before your throat closes off and keeps you from breathing anymore for just a minute. There's a broad spectrum. A terrified gasp of seeing someone who you're terrified of is going to incorporate leaning back to try to get away from them, your muscles seizing, and maybe even your face going numb because terror washing over you has a much different effect than longing washing over you as that person that you love comes into the room versus that person that you are terrified of. So when you're writing that scene and something dramatic happens, make sure you get inside what your character feels, how they would react emotionally, and what that feels like. Okay? Are we crumpling in on ourselves? Are we drawing ourselves up? Are we drawing back? Are we leaning in? Is your stomach convulsing? Is your diaphragm expanding so that you suck in air? There are so many things that we can describe that will give emotional clues to our readers and let them sit in the emotion with our characters and actually feel it. You have to get into the details of the physiology and what that feels like without going on too much. You don't want to describe every single little thing and end up, this happens in a paragraph and 3 paragraphs later you finally get to the response. No, but you want to give enough of those little clues that we feel it in that moment with them. So, when your character is drawn to someone, make sure you think outside the box and think of different ways to describe that pull or that fluffiness you feel inside or whatever. And with gasps, it's a spectrum. So you got to make sure you pinpoint that gasp with the right emotion. Writer tip for the day.